You can sit with the teens. Adults are at that table, my dad snapped, tossing me a plastic spoon. My uncle laughed. Just be grateful we let you attend this time. I ate in silence. Near the end, the event coordinator approached and announced, "Hey, you're covering the $3,800 balance, right?" I smiled, pointed to the head table, and declared, "Ask the adults." I, 34 thought I'd seen the worst of my family's dysfunction, but nothing prepared me for what happened at my cousin's wedding last month. Growing up, I was always the black sheep. While my siblings got praise for every small achievement, I was criticized for breathing too loud. When I graduated college, my parents threw a party for my brother who barely passed high school. When I landed my first job at a tech company, they asked why I couldn't be more like my cousin who worked at the bank. The pattern was clear. I was never good enough. But I made something of myself anyway. Built a successful consulting business, bought a house, traveled the world. Still, family gatherings felt like walking through a minefield. Every conversation was a setup for humiliation. The wedding invitation arrived 3 weeks before the event. My cousin was marrying his college sweetheart at some fancy venue downtown. The family group chat exploded with excitement about the location, the flowers, the open bar. I stayed silent, just happy to be included for once. 2 days before the wedding, my phone buzzed. It was my cousin asking if I could help with some last-minute expenses. The venue had increased their pricing, and they were short on funds. He explained they needed someone to cover the remaining balance, about $3,800. As family, he wondered if I could step in. I thought about it. Despite everything, he was still family. I'd been saving for a new car, but weddings only happen once. I told him I'd take care of it and transferred the money that afternoon. He seemed relieved and grateful, promising to pay me back after their honeymoon. The wedding day arrived. I put on my best suit and drove to the venue. The place was stunning: crystal chandeliers, marble floors, gardens that looked like something from a magazine. My cousin had good taste, even if his wallet couldn't handle it. I walked into the reception area where family members were already gathering. My aunt spotted me first and gave a tight smile. She mentioned how nice I looked, but wondered why I didn't bring a date. Before I could answer, my father appeared beside her. He looked me up and down with that familiar expression of disappointment. Then he gestured toward a table in the corner where my teenage cousins were sitting. He told me that's where I'd be sitting, with the kids. Adults were sitting at the main table, he explained, as if I wasn't 34 years old with my own business. I felt that old familiar burn in my chest. The same feeling from childhood when I'd get sent to my room while the adults talked. But I was too stunned to argue. He handed me a plastic spoon from the kids' table setting and walked away. My uncle appeared next to us, having overheard the conversation. He chuckled and said I should just be grateful they let me attend this time. The comment hit like a slap. I remembered my brother's wedding 2 years ago where they'd uninvited me over some manufactured drama about the seating arrangements. I walked to the corner table in silence. My teenage cousins looked as uncomfortable as I felt. They were good kids. They didn't ask for this awkwardness. We made small talk about school and video games while I watched my family laugh and toast at the adult table. The ceremony was beautiful. My cousin looked happy, his bride radiant. For a moment, I forgot about the seating arrangement and just felt glad for them. Love should be celebrated, even in dysfunctional families. But reception dinner brought back the humiliation. While the adult table got served by waiters with proper silverware, our corner table got buffet-style service and plastic utensils. I ate my chicken and rice in silence, watching my parents hold court like royalty. My father kept shooting looks in my direction, probably making sure I wasn't causing any trouble. My mother ignored me completely, which was somehow worse. They acted like I was some distant relative they barely knew, not their own son. The speeches started after dinner. My uncle stood up first, talking about family values and sticking together through thick and thin. The irony wasn't lost on me. My aunt followed with stories about my cousin's childhood, how proud she was, how the whole family supported him. I wondered what it felt like to have that kind of unconditional support. Even now, at 34, successfully running my own business, I was still the kid relegated to the children's table. The dancing began, and I considered leaving early. But something kept me in my seat. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe I just wanted to see how much worse it could get. Then the event coordinator appeared at my table. She was a professional-looking woman with a clipboard, clearly stressed about something. She looked directly at me and asked if I was ready to settle the remaining balance. I blinked at her, confused. She explained that there was still $3,800 outstanding on the venue bill, and she'd been told I was covering it. Several family members at nearby tables turned to look at us. The conversation was loud enough that people were starting to notice. That's when it clicked. My cousin had told everyone I was paying for part of the wedding. Not that I was helping out as a favor, but that I was the designated payer. That's probably why they felt comfortable treating me like a child. In their minds, I was just the wallet. The coordinator waited for my response. I could feel dozens of eyes on me. My parents looked mortified that their failure of a son was causing a scene. My uncle shook his head like I was embarrassing the family again. But something had shifted inside me. Maybe it was 34 years of accumulated humiliation, or maybe it was just the absurdity of the moment. I smiled at the coordinator and pointed toward the head table where my parents and relatives sat with their proper silverware and adult conversations. I told her she should ask the adults about the bill. After all, I was just sitting with the teenagers. The coordinator looked confused but walked toward the main table. I watched as she approached my father and repeated her question about the balance. His face went through several colors: confusion, then understanding, then panic. My cousin jumped up from the head table and rushed over to me. He asked what I was doing, his voice tight with anxiety. I explained that since I wasn't adult enough to sit with the grown-ups, I clearly wasn't adult enough to handle adult financial responsibilities either. The coordinator stood between our tables, clipboard in hand, waiting for someone to give her a credit card. The wedding guests were starting to notice the commotion. Some pulled out their phones, probably thinking this was some kind of family drama worth recording. My father stormed over to our corner table. He demanded to know what kind of game I was playing. I told him I wasn't playing any games. I was just following his lead. If I belonged at the kids' table, then the adults could handle adult problems. The whole reception had basically stopped at this point. The bride looked mortified. The groom was sweating through his tuxedo, and the coordinator was checking her watch, probably calculating overtime fees. My cousin tried to pull me aside for a private conversation. He said we could work this out quietly, that I was embarrassing everyone. I asked him why he'd told the coordinator I was paying when he'd asked me for help as a favor. He stammered something about assuming I'd handle it since I'd already sent the money. That's when I realized the truth. They'd planned this from the beginning. The late invitation, the degrading seating arrangement, the plastic spoon. It was all designed to put me in my place while still extracting money from me. I was never family to them. I was just a convenient ATM they occasionally had to tolerate. I stood up from the kids' table and addressed the room. I announced that there seemed to be some confusion about financial arrangements. Since everyone had made it clear I wasn't mature enough to sit with the adults, I obviously wasn't responsible enough to handle wedding expenses either. The coordinator, clearly fed up with the family drama, announced that she needed payment immediately or she'd have to shut down the bar and music. The threat got everyone's attention fast. My uncle tried to intervene, suggesting we handle this privately. But I was done with private conversations and family meetings where I got lectured about my attitude. I'd been handling things privately my whole life, and look where it got me. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Right there, in front of everyone, I showed the coordinator the $3,800 transfer I'd made 2 days earlier. I explained that I'd already paid, but since I was apparently just a child, maybe the adults should figure out where that money went. My cousin's face went white. He started explaining to the coordinator that there had been a misunderstanding about the payment arrangements. She wasn't interested in family drama. She just wanted her money. The bride finally spoke up, asking her new husband what was going on. In front of 50 wedding guests, my cousin had to admit that he'd already received my money but spent it on something else. Probably the honeymoon, based on his guilty expression. My father tried to salvage the situation by offering to cover the balance himself. But when the coordinator ran his card, it was declined. My mother's card was also declined. One by one, the adults at the head table tried to pay, but none of them could cover $3,800 on the spot. The coordinator gave them 20 minutes to figure it out before she'd have to shut down the reception. My cousin begged me to just pay again, promising to reimburse me twice over. But I was done being the family's emergency fund. I told everyone I was heading home. As I walked toward the exit, my father called after me, saying I was ruining my cousin's wedding over petty grievances. I turned around and asked him whose fault it really was. Mine for refusing to be treated like a child, or theirs for creating this situation in the first place. My teenage cousins actually started clapping as I left. Even they could see the justice in what had happened. Update 1. I got home to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Most were from family members calling me selfish, immature, and vindictive. A few were from cousins my age saying they wished they'd had the courage to do what I did. The best message came from one of the teenagers at my table. She texted that watching me stand up to the adults was the most badass thing she'd ever seen. She said the whole kids' table was rooting for me. My cousin called the next morning, begging me to reconsider. He said they'd managed to borrow money from the bride's family to cover the venue, but now his new in-laws thought his family was broke and dysfunctional. I told him that was an accurate assessment. He admitted that my father had suggested the seating arrangement as a way to keep me humble. They'd assumed I'd just quietly pay and be grateful for the invitation. The arrogance was breathtaking. Update 2. 3 weeks later, my aunt called to invite me to my cousin's birthday party. She mentioned they'd reserved a spot for me at the adult table this time. I thanked her for the offer, but declined. I explained that I'd made other plans, specifically a weekend trip to Europe with the money I would have spent on their mortgage payment. She asked what I meant about their mortgage payment. I told her about the loan my cousin had asked for the week after the wedding, another $5,000 to help with house payments. Apparently, the wedding expenses had wiped out their savings completely. I'd said no, of course, but I was curious about who they'd ask next. Probably one of the other adults from the head table. The best part of this whole situation is how it's changed family dynamics. My younger cousins now treat me like a hero. They've started questioning why they get dismissed from adult conversations and why their opinions don't matter. At the last family gathering I attended, one of my teenage cousins asked why adults got to make all the decisions when they were the ones making all the mistakes. My uncle didn't have a good answer for that. I've also noticed that the family's financial requests have dried up completely. No more calls about emergency expenses or investment opportunities. It's amazing how quickly people learn to budget when their backup plan disappears. Update 3. 6 months later, I ran into my cousin at a coffee shop. He looked tired and stressed. He mentioned that marriage was harder than he'd expected, especially with money problems. I asked if he'd learned anything from the wedding situation. He admitted that treating me like a child while expecting me to pay adult expenses had been wrong. He said he'd been thinking about it a lot. But then he asked if I'd consider helping them with their credit card debt. Just a small loan, maybe $2,000 to get them back on track. He promised things would be different this time. I smiled and told him that sounded like an adult problem. Maybe he should ask the adults in the family for help. The look on his face was priceless. Finally, after 34 years, the lesson had sunk in. You can't treat someone like a child and expect them to solve your grown-up problems. I paid for my coffee and walked out, leaving him sitting there with his empty cup and his adult-sized debt. Some lessons are worth $3,800. Others are priceless. These days, I spend holidays with friends who appreciate me and family dinners with people who respect me. Turns out, you don't have to stay at the kids' table just because someone puts you there. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to play their game anymore. My business is thriving, my relationships are healthier, and I sleep better at night knowing I don't owe anyone anything, financially or emotionally. The family still sends invitations to weddings and parties, but now they include a note about bringing my own silverware. I always decline politely. After all, I have adult things to do.